ultimate consciousness transcends any form. It's formless. Mm-hmm. But how do you know yourself? How in some sense does it know itself? Well, it knows itself by taking different perspectives on itself. So, and that's what an avatar is. It's a projection of itself. It's saying, well, let me look at myself from this point of view. And let me actually get so wrapped up in that point of view that I don't even know it's a point of view. I think it's the truth. Mm-hmm. So then I really absorb that point of view, and then let me wake up. Then I'll wake up and realize, no, I spent 70 years of my life thinking I was just this body. And then I woke up so I realized I'm not that. As complicated as this world is.
I'd like to welcome to the show, Don Hoffman. How you doing, Don?
Very good. How about you, Alex? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend. I'm excited to talk to you about simulation theory, which is one of my favorite subjects in the world to talk about, spirituality, consciousness, quantum physics, all of it kind of mixed in a nice little big soup. So I'm going to start off with a very easy question. What is consciousness?
One way to think about it is something that psychologists call ostensive definition. Okay. So when you're teaching a 18-month-old some words, they're just starting to learn words, what do you do? So mom or dad is sitting with Chris, 18-month-old Chris, and there's a cat on a mat, and it's time for Chris to learn the word cat. And so how do you define the word cat to Chris? Well, what you do is you point at the cat and you say cat, and you then expect your baby Chris to look and get it. And it's a miracle. They do. They look and they get it. Now, it's a miracle because if you point at the cat on the mat, you could be referring to the ear, the color of the fur, the texture of the fur, the left paw and the mat, the nose and the left paw. What is it that you're referring to, right? And yet they get it. So you're counting on there's some coordination between the parent and the child so that you can just point and say cat and they get it the first time. And so this is called ostensive definition. And for someone who's never tasted cinnamon, how am I going to define cinnamon to them? The way I'm going to define cinnamon is I'm going to give them a piece of cinnamon and say, taste it. And then I'm going to point and say, that's cinnamon. And hope they get it, right? So that's how we define everything. We essentially define almost everything by pointing. Now in mathematics, of course, once you have a certain number of pointers in mathematics, then you can start to do formulas and so forth. But in general, all the important stuff in life that we know about, we got it by pointing and then learning by ostensive definition. So what I'm going to do with consciousness is the same thing as the parent does with the cat, right? I have to point at something and say, do you get it? And if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, you don't. So that's how you define these kinds of concepts. So what I can say is pure consciousness. If you sit alone and it's dark and it's absolutely quiet and you let go of all thoughts and you're just aware, you're just sitting there and aware, but not aware of anything, just aware of being aware. That's my pointer to consciousness. And you either get it or you don't, right? Just like you get cinnamon or rabbit or you don't. That's the pointer.
Yeah, it's interesting but anyone who's meditated understands that. Who's meditated deeply or just has done it at a certain level gets that. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying. But for someone who hasn't meditated, how can you further point to another aspect of consciousness that they might grab onto?
There's consciousness, and then there's the contents of consciousness. If you want to know consciousness, the contents are easy. If I say, the taste of mint, that's a conscious experience. The smell of garlic, that's a conscious experience. Everybody can get that. If you're asking what is consciousness, Then I have to give you little instructions. It's sort of like if you want to taste what coffee is like, well, you have to take these coffee beans, grind them up, put some hot water on them, put it in a cup, and wait until it cools down, then drink it. And that'll be what we mean by the taste of coffee. And so there are certain procedures you have to go through. So for those who've never meditated, I think most people have had some point in their life where they're silent, but we can do that. If you haven't ever done that, you can just go in a dark room, turn out the lights, avoid all distractions, all sounds, sit there and let your thoughts go. And when you get to a space where there are no thoughts, even for just a second or two, it doesn't have to be a long time, just you're sitting there and nothing's going through your head for just a second or two, and you're just aware of that, you're aware of the gap. You're aware of that gap, aware of the awareness gap. Then that's what I'm pointing to by consciousness. That's the direct experience of it. Now, as a scientist, I want to then go on and do mathematical models, right? I'm going to say, okay, that's the thing I'm modeling. It's just like if I say, like, for example, in physics, we have Euclidean models of space-time, or we have Einstein's models of space-time. Now, those are mathematics, right? There's Newton's Euclidean approach, there's Einstein's hyperbolic space-time approach. But if you ask me, what is space-time? What are space and time? What is space-time? I would say, okay, just here's my pointer. Look around you. There you see walls and furniture and so forth, but what's between you and the walls and the furniture? Right. That emptiness is what we mean by space or space-time. In Einstein's thing. So that's going to be my direct pointer to you to say that's what we mean. And then you say, but well, that's not Euclidean. I mean, there's no numbers there. There's no hyper. I mean, that's just my experience. Absolutely. Your experience of space is your experience of space. What we do as scientists then is say, let's attach numbers to that experience and then see what we can do. And then you might say, well, but the experience is far deeper than the numbers. Absolutely. The experience transcends the numbers. And yet, what we find is when we start to assign numbers and structures to our experiences and start to do mathematics with them, we get someplace. Like Einstein, with his mathematics, predicted that there are black holes. I mean, his mathematics predicted. He didn't like the prediction, but his mathematics predicted it, even though he didn't like his own prediction. And so we find that even though the mathematics can only, in some sense, be a baby step in the direction of the reality that I pointed to, right? Space or space-time, whatever that is profound. Our mathematics is difficult, but it scratches the surface of the profundity of space-time. And the same thing with our mathematical models of consciousness. So consciousness is very, very deep and profound. But as scientists, we have to humbly put down and say, well, here's my next baby step in the science of consciousness.
Well, let me ask you this then. Quantum entanglement kind of throws space-time out the window, to my understanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong with the concept of quantum entanglement, when there is two atoms, two neutrons, I forgot what the actual two units were, but if one changes here 1,000 miles away, the other one is affected. Can you explain that from a mathematical standpoint, or is there even an explanation? Because now we're getting into the spooky physics that Einstein spoke about.
So yes, if you have two photons, for example, they can get entangled, or just two particles, they can be entangled, their states can be entangled. And what that means is that if you measure, say, the spin of one particle, and the other particle is, many, many light years away, say, that's entangled, instantaneously what the spin of the other one was, even though it's could be millions of light years away. So if it were measured, that is what it would be. And so there's that kind of non-local, in the sense of Einstein's space-time requires that no signal propagates through space-time faster than the speed of light, about 300,000 kilometers per second, roughly. And so this is an instantaneous connection, which Einstein didn't like, right? But it turns out that the entanglement is true. It really is true. And as you say, it does show that there are limitations to the structure of space-time as being a fundamental structure. It suggests that as we probe into physics more deeply, we're going to be looking for things beyond space-time. And there's another pointer in that direction, and that is that Einstein's own equations, together with those of quantum theory, so his gravitational theory and quantum theory together entail that space-time ceases to have any operational meaning at about 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43 seconds. But it means that if you try to use space-time any further, you get nonsense. No experiment.
You run into a wall. You run into a wall.
You run into a wall. So space-time, and it's not 10 to the minus 33 trillion centimeters, it's just 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. So we run into that wall where space-time ceases to have any operational meaning at just 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. So many physicists now are saying space-time is doomed, like David Gross, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on quantum chromodynamics, Amar Kani-Ahmed, who's at the Institute for Advanced Study, and many others have been saying, I think to them it's just obvious. These are, again, all high-energy theoretical physicists. Physics is a very, very broad field. The physicists who are saying space-time is doomed are the experts in this particular area of physics who are the gurus of space-time, high energy theoretical physics. They're sort of the gurus of space-time. And they're the ones that say it's over, we're looking for a deeper structure. And by the way, they're finding some. We can talk about that if you want. They're finding new structure.
So that was my next question, is because space-time is fundamental, or was fundamental, to our experience of this universe. I mean, between here and the moon, there is space, and it takes time to travel through that space. That's just fundamental in this materialistic world that we're in right now. But now with quantum physics, it seems that the physics community in general is starting to, there's so much evidence. Before it was a little bit here and there, but now the evidence is piling up so high that they can't ignore it anymore. And they're just like, no, this is over. We need to start looking for other areas. And from my understanding, they're starting to open themselves up to, not to the word spirituality, but they're opening up to things that just would never even been spoken about 50 years ago, 20 years ago, even. And they're opening up to these ideas like consciousness. Having a conversation with the scientists about consciousness is fairly new. Would you agree?
Well, yes. When I was a graduate student, it wasn't kosher for us to talk about it. I was interested in it, but I knew I shouldn't talk about it.
Don't ask it in class. Don't ask that question in class.
That's right. No, that would show that you weren't a serious scientist or thinker. But yeah, many high energy theoretical physicists are now saying we need to look beyond space-time. Now, most of them are looking for mathematical structures beyond space-time. And they may have spiritual ideas as well, but there is actual rigorous work by these physicists being done where they're saying, okay, space-time is not fundamental. We need deeper structures beyond space-time that then project back down to space-time and give us back the physics that we know inside space-time as a special case of a deeper physics. And they're succeeding in finding these new structures. So it's really quite impressive what they're doing. They found something called the amplituhedron, which allows them to compute scattering amplitudes, when particles smash into each other at the Large Hadron Collider and they go spraying out. They look for the probability amplitudes for all those things happening. And when you do it inside space-time, the math is a mess. Hundreds of pages, like 2 gluons smashing into each other, 4 gluons spraying out, or 6 gluons spraying out. Hundreds of pages of algebra for one event. Hundreds of pages of algebra to compute the probability for one event. Do it outside of space-time, 3 or 4 terms you can compute by hand. And then you see new symmetries. So what they're discovering is if you let go of space-time, I mean, space-time is very useful, right? We use it all the time.
Every day.
It's very, very useful. But it's got limits, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, then it's over. And when you then say, well, are there new structures not curled up inside space-time, not like string theory where these things are curled up inside extra dimensions of space-time, utterly outside of space-time? We have to think outside of space-time. And you might go, well, how in the world can you do that? And here's how you do it. Space-time, I'll suggest, is just a VR headset. We're using it as a VR headset. And what science has been doing, we thought we were getting a theory of everything. We thought we were studying the final, we were closing in on the theory of everything. What we've discovered is all this time, we thought we were just going after the final reality. We were just studying our headset. We got really good at figuring out our headset, so good that then we figured out, holy smoke, space-time is just a headset. It's not the truth. It's not the final reality. And so now that we have all these tools, the rigors of science, no dogmatism, give me mathematical theories, make hard predictions, we go test them, no nonsense. Mm-hmm. That's brand new, like since Galileo, roughly, that we've had those incredible tools. And using those tools, they're so powerful that they told us that we were wrong about space-time. We thought it was the final reality, and our own science told us you're wrong. It's only a headset. So now but now we have the tools. And so we can use those tools and step outside the headset. We can take the headset off, not literally because we're sort of saddled with this headset. But because we have mathematical tools and we can do experiments, we can, as scientists, move outside the headset and start to find these new structures like the decorated permutations and the amplituhedron and other structures that they're finding. So, and this is only in the last 10 years. Only in the last 10 years that these new structures have been found outside, where we really say, okay, we have to go outside space-time. Hints of it, there's something in 2005, there's something called the BCFW recursion relations that Ed Witten and his collaborators discovered, which were the big clue about these new structures outside space-time. But we really, in some sense, the real big first step was in 2014, with the publication of the amplituhedron by Nimar Kani-Hamed and his collaborators. So that's less than 10 years. So this is all brand new stuff. And most physicists who are not high energy theoretical physicists don't know about this. They just don't know, because this is a special branch of physics that focuses on this. So most quantum theorists don't know this.
Right. So that was my next question, is that from my understanding, there's physicists and then there's quantum physicists. And many times neither the two shall meet, because they are one's really locked into more materialism, which is older dogma, like this is just the way it is for the last 400 or 500 years. And then when quantum physics showed up, they were like, no, we can't go into that world because it's going to disprove all this stuff that we just know is real. And now it seems that there's even something higher than quantum physics, is what you're talking about, all these other things that they're discovering at this other branch of physics that is really working within quantum physics, or at least aiming towards it. But it's at least moving. Quantum physics hadn't even moved in 80 or 90 years, really. Is that a fair statement?
Well, of course, there's the foundations were laid long ago, right. And then we got to, with Feynman and his contemporaries, we got quantum field theory. Mm-hmm. But now what many of the high energy theoretical physicists are saying, like Nimar Kani-Hamed, are saying that not only is space-time doomed, but quantum theory is doomed. It's not fundamental either, but it's not deep enough. And what he's looking for, and what many of them are looking for now, is a deeper framework in which space-time and quantum theory emerge together, joined together. And here's the idea is this. When you look at quantum theory, well, this is one idea. Now what I'm about to say is my idea. I'm not putting this on anybody else. Okay, so this is, I would say that Robert Speckens, who's a physicist, is saying something very similar. But again, I'm not going to tar and feather these guys. So if anything I say is stupid, it's on me, not on these guys. Okay. Sure. What I'm saying, but I think that many other physicists would agree, like Chris Fuchs, who does cubism interpretations, is that all the weirdness of quantum theory, so the no cloning theorem, entanglement, superposition, and many of these properties are simply due to incomplete information. And that ties into this headset idea. If space-time is just a headset, a headset only gives you incomplete information about what you're interacting with, right? Like when you play virtual reality games, I'm playing Grand Theft Auto in virtual reality. What is the reality that I'm interacting with? Well, it's some supercomputer. How much information does my headset give you about that supercomputer? Not much. It's lost a ton of, there's this whole complicated universe out there that I'm really interacting with. And I have no clue about that. If I'm a typical VR user, I have no clue about the gigabytes of software and the diodes and resistors and the voltages and magnetic fields that are all, I have no idea about that. I'm just turning a steering wheel and hitting the gas pedal, and that's all I see. So quantum mechanics, all the weirdness of quantum mechanics is just a symptom of the fact that it's tied to space-time, and space-time is a headset, and the headset loses information. Just that simple. So that's all the weirdness. So there's nothing really deep about the weirdness of quantum mechanics, except to say, well, you thought that you saw the truth, and you don't. You see a headset which is giving you a veneer, a veneer,
Sure,
over this complicated reality beyond it.
well, it's
But
looking
science is up to it.
but it's basically what's going on now. So if you take your headset off, the reality we live in, there is so much more information in this room than can be jammed into that little headset that I have on. And if I walk out my door, then nature and this, and you look up, and there's so much processing power that would be needed to render all of this, which then brings me to my next question.
Right.
I would love to hear your theory on simulation theory, that we are all in this quote unquote matrix simulation. What is your theory behind that?
So Nick Bostrom and others are quite famous for this kind of theory. And the assumption, I should spell it out just a little bit, what version I'm talking about. They typically will say, that you and I and the world we see around us, we think it's the truth, but it really isn't. It's just there's some computer programmer, some pimply head kid with their laptop in another reality that has programmed this all up, and we're just a simulation in their little laptop. But then you can recurse that back. But that person, that pimply head programmer, is not the final reality, because there's another pimply head programmer at a deeper reality with their laptop that's programming them. And so we can go this all the way back, and you go all the way back. There's finally some laptop and some programmer at the fundamental reality that's the start of this whole thing. So they say the probability that we're at the base, given that there could be thousands of these, probably that we're the ones at the base is 0. So we're probably in a simulation, that sort of deal. Now, what they say then is that the base reality, they assume, is a physical kind of space-time reality. So there's still a physicalist framework. And they're assuming that a properly programmed computer can generate conscious experiences, or the illusion of conscious experiences. And to date, I mean, many of my colleagues who are studying consciousness believe that. But when you ask them, and there are many, many theories. So there's integrated information theory, there's global workspace theory, orchestrated collapse of quantum states of neuronal microtubules, there's attentional schema theories, there are higher order theories, first order theory, there's tons and tons of theories. But and all of them in one way or another are saying, we can't, if you give me certain functional properties, the right kind of functional properties of certain kinds of physical systems, then I can give you conscious experiences out of that. Taste of chocolate, the smell of garlic, and so forth. Great. So that's what they claim that they can do. That our scientific theories will start with some functional description of some system, and they're always thinking of some kind of physical system, maybe neurons or some circuits in an artificial intelligence system or something like that. And then we will give you conscious experiences emerging out of it, or the illusion of conscious experiences emerging out of it. So and these are my friends and colleagues, and they're brilliant, and they are brilliant. But when I ask them, and these are my friends, I'll ask them, okay, like Stuart Hameroff with orchestrated collapse of quantum states of neuronal microtubules, or Giulio Tononi for IIT. Great. So been at it for several decades. So what conscious experience have you been able to show? I mean, the functional structure for, like the taste of chocolate or mint. Can you give which one? There are millions of colors, millions of, I presume by now you have hundreds of thousands of conscious experiences that you've given me. You've written down the functional thing that must be the taste of mint, the functional thing that must be this shade of red. You must have hundreds of thousands of these. So just give me one. Zero. Zero. Nobody has anything. So it's so bad that Steven Pinker in his 2018 book, Enlightenment Now, said, what we may have to do is just stipulate that, there's this functional pattern. He was talking about, I think, the global workspace theory.
Mhm.
We'll have to stipulate that this conscious experience, it corresponds to this state of the global workspace. Well, my attitude is, you're stipulating the conscious experiences, you're stipulating the physical stuff, you're stipulating the functional stuff. It's all stipulation. There's no explanation going on here. So I say all that to say that now to get back to your question, this simulation theory is assuming that the computer and functional properties of the computer can actually give us conscious experiences or the illusion of conscious experiences. And there's not a shred of evidence in terms of successful scientific theories that's feasible. There's nothing on the table that says you should believe that.
Is there a world where in the future, maybe in your lifetime, maybe in mine, maybe in my kid's lifetime, where there'll be physicists and theorists that are going to be cross-pollinated with spiritualists, because it's the only thing left to kind of go after? Because once you keep running into walls with these theories, and math eventually also runs into walls because you haven't cracked it yet. But when you start getting into spirituality, which is what the ancients were talking about, and we could talk about the ancients in a minute,
Mhm.
about it seems that they are transcending reality, and there is proof of different types of transcensions of realities. There's psychedelics that take you into different realms, different realities. There's so many things that are unexplainable by physics, but yet there is something happening. So to find a physicist or a theorist that can bridge between the two and finally open things up in a way that one or the other can't do by themselves, I think that's where we're all going. Would you agree?
Yes, I think that the spiritual traditions have been saying that space-time isn't fundamental for thousands of years.
The Vedic Text, yeah, of course.
And the scientists are coming to that party late. We're late to that party. But the high energy theoretical physicists are saying, yes, but space-time is not fundamental. Space-time is doomed. So I think that humanity, we've had the spiritual traditions and the scientific, and they've tended, since Galileo and his imprisonment and so forth by the church, there's been a little bit of antipathy between the two and distrust and so forth. Well, I think both have a piece of the picture and both have a problem. Mm-hmm. So the piece of the picture that the scientists have is the scientific method. We know now to do mathematical models, have hard-nosed standards, no BS. Give me an experiment, give me the math, we go test it, and so forth. So that's important. They've assumed that space-time is fundamental. They've been physicalists. That's been a useful hypothesis for a few centuries, but now it's over. But most scientists don't know it's over. It's the high energy theoretical physicists who are spreading the word. It's over, and we need to go. So, but now the spiritual traditions are there. They're saying, hey, we've been out there beyond space-time for thousands of years. Welcome to the party. You're latecomers. Right. But now what the spiritual traditions tell us, they say it's very, very important. None of our writings are the truth. They're pointers to the truth. Mm-hmm. And they're very, very careful to say that. The Tao Te Ching says the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao. Right. And if you understand that, then it's fine. It's to read the rest of the book. If you don't understand that, you'll think that you're seeing the truth. No, you're getting a pointer. Just like I started off with extensive definition, and partly for this very reason. I pointed to consciousness in a certain way. I can't, if you don't know what consciousness is yourself, I can't help you. If you've never tasted mint, I can't help you. I can give you a piece of mint and let you taste it, and then say, that is mint, and I point to it. So that's in the sense that the spiritual traditions are pointing to the spiritual realm. If you don't experience it yourself, no word will get you there. But what the spiritual traditions are missing is mathematical precision in their pointers. They understand that their words are pointers, but the mathematical pointers tell you their limits. Einstein's mathematics for space-time tells you that pointer, the space-time pointer, falls apart at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43 seconds. That is an antidote to dogmatism. And it tells you need a new and deeper pointer. Mm. We haven't had that in the spiritual traditions. And what's been the result? Dogmatism. Fighting to the death. People of one religion killing people of another religion because your pointer, I don't agree with your pointer. I believe my pointer is the final truth. Well, wait a minute. Your leader told you right up front, it's just a pointer. The Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. It's not worth killing people over pointers. So that's where the spiritual traditions have failed. Their pointers are not rigorous. And so they lead to dogmatism. They invite dogmatism. Not in the adept, not the leaders, but the followers who don't really understand that the pointers are just pointers.
I mean, look, we don't have to get into the wars that are going on right now, but there are specific dogmatic traditions that are creating the wars that that are going on as we speak. I think it was Yogananda, the great yogi, who said about Jesus, which I've said this many times, I'll say it again, it's one of my favorite quotes. He goes, Jesus died on the cross in one day, but his teachings have been crucified for the last 2,000 years. And it's so true that if you go back to the origin of any of these spiritual leaders, they say these things. They're pointers, but then it's the apostles, the followers, they are the ones that start constructing this dogmatic, system, because they can't grasp at the level that they were at. They were at such a higher level of evolution or vibration or whatever you want to call it, that they just can't grab. They can't grab on to these ideas. I mean, Jesus is a perfect example, but then so are many, from Buddha to Muhammad to so many different spiritual leaders from around the world. They all eventually go to dogma. And that's one thing I didn't understand when I was growing up. I'm like, so what do you mean? So I'm right? Because I'm Catholic, obviously. So I'm a recovering Catholic, by the way. So I was like, I'm like, but then even as a child, I'm like, so the 1.5 billion Buddhists, they're all going to hell? Or the Muslims are all going to hell? Or the Zoroastrians are all going to hell? Or God forbid, how about there's some poor schmuck in the middle of the Congo somewhere, never heard of Jesus. Is he going to go to hell? Like it started to, just like your mathematics, Einstein's space-time, it just starts to break apart. That doesn't make any sense, any logical sense. So then this other theory of everything that I haven't come up with, but that we're all one, that we're all part of a human consciousness, a quantum field, if you will. And there's a lot of people talking about the quantum field and how certain things are possible, like entanglement theory, possibly through the quantum field, that space, what's going on in that space. And I've seen models now, I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson was showing it in one of his interviews, that space around planets, it's like a flat space, and the planet pulls down, and that's the gravity. So it's kind of like the ball going in like around. That's how the gravity. So space is not space. It's a field that's being manipulated by gravity and other things. It makes your head hurt, Donald.
Right. So I agree that what you said about the pointers of the religious groups, that typically the originators of of Christianity or Buddhism and so forth, were at a different level. They were not dogmatic. They understood that the Tao that can be spoken of and is not the true Tao. But the rest of us typically don't get that. We get dogmatic about it. And what science brings to the table is a language of mathematics, where the mathematics itself tells you this only goes to 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and then it stops. And then you have to look for something else. So don't get dogmatic about space-time. It tells you. Now, of course, scientists are people. They are as inclined to be dogmatic as anybody else. But science is a social institution, and the demand for mathematically precise theories is the antidote to dogmatism. So that's what I think science can offer to the spiritual traditions, is a mathematically precise thing. Now, the notion of quantum fields, turns out the high energy theoretical physicists who are going beyond space-time are saying quantum field theory was, of course, an important breakthrough. And when Feynman and his contemporaries gave us a great gift, and it's been useful for several decades, for 80 years or so. Well, yeah, I guess, yeah.
It was in the 1920.
Well, that was quantum field theory. Feynman probably in the 1940s.
Sure, fair enough.
40s, 50s, where the quantum field theory came out. So, almost 70 or 80 years. But it turns out that the quantum fields introduce unnecessary redundancy. And no one's ever seen a quantum field.
Right.
We see particles. Fields are a construct to try to help us compute things like scattering amplitudes. But Nima Ahmed, for example, is saying basically quantum fields are sort of a kludge. The fields probably they're getting in the way. When you use these fields in space-time, they make the mathematics unnecessarily complicated. 2 gluons in, 6 gluons out, hundreds of pages of algebra. You don't need all that. That's because we're using quantum fields. It's a bad computational apparatus. It had its place, but we've gone beyond it. Now we can do that computation in 3 or 4 terms and see symmetries that are true of the scattering data that you can't see in space-time. So, quantum fields were a necessary step in our growing pains to try to get to a better theory. But I think, frankly, that the notion of fields will fall by the wayside, as certainly as an ontologically interesting thing. The fields but the idea of things beyond space-time and connections beyond space-time, that's going to stay. So yeah. That's the sense in which I think you were using it. Fields, talking about some kind of connection. Absolutely. But quantum fields are a kludge. The notion of connections beyond space-time, that can still hold. And that I agree with you when you said we're all deeply one.
That's at the end of the day, that is the truth. That is the one truth. That's not a pointer.
That I agree.
That's not a pointer. That is the truth. We are all one. If you look at the planet from space, you could just see we're all in this together. We are all one. What's really interesting to me is I've been seeing what's going on with AI in translations. And I just, when I started to see the power of what's coming up it's already here, but really we're probably about 6 months to a year of this conversation where translations will be so easy to do to video that it's going to open up this world in a way that we really don't understand yet. But then I just came back from Europe, where I was using an app to communicate with my Uber driver and have full conversations with my Uber driver with Google Translate. But then I was like, well, wait a minute. In my lifetime, there will be a little machine that will put in my ear, and that as soon as I speak, it will come out in the language through the speaker of the person I'm hearing. And I would hear, it will be instantaneous to the point where we are all becoming one. This limitation of language and not culture. Culture, of course, still, everyone has their culture, but this globalization that we've been eking towards, and from where we were in the 20s of the 19th century to where we are in the 20s now, how much more globalized we are, that we are really dependent on each other. And the internet really opened that all up for all of us. I do see that that's going to be a world where language is not going to be an issue anymore. And the miscommunications won't be as prevalent as they are now. Would you agree?
No, I absolutely agree. I think that the technology is moving. We'll probably have that within a few years. And it will help bridge the gap. I think that will do something to help us understand each other better and not discriminate against each other. It's hard when you can't understand somebody at all. It's much easier to sort of put them off and say they're unlike me and not treat them as an equal. But when you actually start to hear very human things coming back to you from them, then you realize, oh no, that's another person of feelings just like me and maybe different beliefs than me. But
you know what, and the thing, I think this is only from someone who can travel a little bit outside of their own home country. I mean, you could travel within the country, and there's very different people within our country of the U.S. Without question, from different area and different regions. But when you start to go around the world a bit and start going to different countries, you just start to realize like they just want happiness for their kids. They want to be safe. They want to be happy in general. They want to live their lives in peace. I mean, we all have this in common.
That's right.
And it's I think that those walls are starting to come down and more. Again, the internet opened us up in a way that was a model. I always said this, and I'm sure I'm not the first to say it, that the internet is kind of the rudimentary, kind of barbaric example of what the ancients called the Akashic Records, where all information is all connected at all time.
Right.
Right now we're starting to get close to being able to just say, "Hey Siri, what is quantum physics? Can you explain it to me as a 3-year-old?" And then or ChatGPT, can you explain it to me? We're starting to get to that place. And let me ask you this question though: what is your understanding of the Akashic Records, Akashic field, if you will? Because I had Dr. Erwin Laszlo, Nobel nominee, on, who's written multiple books about the Akashic Records, the Akashic field, and how that is that connects us all. I'd love to hear if you have any points on that.
Right. So as a scientist, what I want are mathematical models about, as much as I can, about the one connecting consciousness. And I've got a paper called Fusions of Consciousness. It came out in January. So it's free. So if you just Google Fusions of Consciousness, you can get the paper for free and look at our mathematical model. But this gets back now to the start of our conversation, which is that even the mathematics, precise mathematics, and all the things that we can prove, and it's a lot, is just a baby step. It's trivial. What I've done, what my team has done, what all of us who are doing mathematical models of consciousness have done, is trivial compared to the real thing, right? And it's in principle, we can never get a theory of everything in science.
No. Science
has the best pointers that mankind has ever come up with. But it's obvious that a scientific theory says, grant me these assumptions. If you grant me these assumptions, then I can explain all this wonderful stuff. But if you don't give me those assumptions, then I can't explain anything. and notice the theory doesn't explain its assumptions. It assumes the assumptions. It doesn't explain them. It assumes them. So it doesn't explain everything. We say, but of course, I can get a deeper theory that explains those assumptions. Yes, you can. And that deeper theory has its own assumptions that it doesn't explain. So there is no theory of everything, and there can never be. And in fact, science, in a technical sense, will only know probability 0 of the truth. But it's very important what we're doing. We should continue to do it, even though it's measure 0. It's clear that we do get insights, and some theories are better than others. Einstein's theory is better than Newton's, and Newton's theory is better than almost anything that you and I could come up with, right?
That's fair enough.
So it's clear that even though there's no scientific theory of everything, not all theories are created equal. Some are better than others. And we should put our efforts in to get good scientific theories and to be completely humble and say our best scientific theories are trivial compared to the reality, to the deep Akashic field, if you will, the deep one consciousness. If you want to know that deep one consciousness, intellectually, yes, our mathematical models might be the best thing that you can come up with right now.
Sure.
If you want to know it more deeply, then my pointer is this: you are that consciousness, and so am I. And the way to know it is to let go of any conceptions of who I am. If you sit in silence and in darkness and let go of all thoughts and just ask yourself the question, who am I? And then let go of any thoughts, no answers, and just sit there. That's your answer. You are. And but it's a non-conceptual knowledge. You know it directly, just like you know the taste of mint by tasting mint. You know the deep, profound truth of reality just by sitting in silence and tasting it, so to speak, by being it.
And that is why these masters who walk the earth almost always, especially coming from the East, spoke about meditation, prayer is another example of meditation in many ways. Just being silent, being quiet within yourself. is something that I've seen again and again and again, even in my own studies and experiences. Now,
And that's because you are the truth. You are the truth that transcends any statement of truth, that any description. That's why that's the case. And that's also the problem that we have, is that we don't recognize everybody else as just the same truth as I am. I have my words, you have your words, and they're different. And so then we fight over the words, where when you let go of the words and you realize I'm face to face with the reality that I am, and you are the one reality.
But Don, we need a middleman to be between us and the ultimate consciousness, don't we? A dogmatic
the
middleman
framework, right? We need Jesus or a priest or both between us. Whereas it's interesting in the Bible. At one point, the Pharisees were picking up stones to stone Jesus, and Jesus said, why are you guys going to kill me with stones? And they said, well, because you claim to be the Son of God. And Jesus said, well, in the Psalms, it says, I have said you are gods and all of you are sons of the Most High. Jesus said, if he calls them gods to whom the word of God came, why are you trying to stone me for just saying I'm the Son of God? But what Jesus is saying is, to each one of them, you are God. That's what he's saying. You are God. And he couldn't have been clearer. And he quoted from the book of Psalms. So, but of course, you don't get that. My father was a Protestant Christian minister for many years. And by the way, he was Protestant, so we all believed Catholics weren't going to make it to heaven, right? So it was. I
mean, obviously, right. all the different sects of Christianity is ridiculous. There's so many of them.
It was, and it is that kind of ridiculousness, though, that when you actually look at Jesus' words, and he's basically saying all of us are children of God. What does it mean to be a child? A child of a human is human. A child of God is God. And so when we say we're children of God, what we're saying is all of us are God. What we are is God looking at itself through an avatar. There's my avatar, there's your avatar, there's Jesus' avatar, there's Buddha's. These are all just avatars. It's the one infinite intelligence looking at itself through different avatars. So your little baby, your 10-year-old child, your wife, your husband, they're all the infinite intelligence looking at itself through an avatar.
I with the conversation of simulation theory, there's also game theory that gets tossed on there sometimes too. I've had some game theorists on the show talking about simulation theory through a gamer's point of view, and I always use the example of Link and Zelda. Like when back in the day, that's when I gamed. So right. The late 80s, early 90s. So, you are Link. Link is your avatar. And you continuously go through the game. And then when you turn the corner, you get killed. Oh, there was an orc there. But then the next time you go through, you know that there's going to be an orc there. So you're prepared for it. Well, that's just the evolution of the soul. That is the evolution of life. You learn along the way. So, and then even video games inherently prove reincarnation again and again, because there's multiple lives to come back and keep trying the thing again and again and again. So, but the question is, though, if that's the player, who is the one with the controller playing the game? Because just like us, when we're playing a video game, it's almost irrelevant what's happening in the game. Like, our avatar can get ripped apart 1,000 times by a boss of the level, and we're just like, oh, let's do it again. Oh, let's do it again. Oh, let's figure it out. Oh, let's do it again. But to that poor avatar, it really hurts. It's a torturous event. But for the player, so I would say, then you look at that like, well, what we're going through on this earth in this experience, there is an oversoul, a player, the soul itself, the higher self, whatever word you want to call it, is you not playing the game, but observing the game. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of game theory idea.
Yes, I think that there is this infinite, timeless, one intelligence, one consciousness that is what you are, and that's what you actually tap into when you go into silence and let go of all thought. You realize that that's what you really are. You really aren't just this guy that weighs so much and has this color hair and lives and so. Those are just your avatar descriptions. And so there is the question, why would the one timeless intelligence do this? Why? What's the point of it? Why all these wars and fighting and religions where people are killing each other and dogmatism and the whole bit? Why does it do that? Why does it? And of course, the answer is I don't know. But here's one possibility: is that in some sense, the one intelligence, the one ultimate consciousness, transcends any form. It's formless. Mm-hmm. But how do you know yourself? How in some sense does it know itself? Well, it knows itself by taking different perspectives on itself. So, and that's what an avatar is. It's a projection of itself. It's saying, well, let me look at myself from this point of view. And let me actually get so wrapped up in that point of view that I don't even know it's a point of view. I think it's the truth. Mm-hmm. So then I really absorb that point of view, and then let me wake up. Then I'll wake up and realize, no, I spent 70 years of my life thinking I was just this body. And then I woke up so I realized I'm not that. As complicated as this world is, and it's the universe is billions of light years. There's the moon, there's the sun. Look at the planets and the flowers, incredible microbiology, all the sciences, all that stuff. And I completely transcend all of that. All of that is trivial compared to who I am. When you wake up, you realize all of that is complicated. I'm not that. I transcend that. So now I go, holy smoke, what am I? I'm not this. So that's what consciousness is up to. Putting on an avatar, allowing itself to get lost, completely identified with the avatar. Really absorbing that point of view, and then recognizing it's only a point of view and waking up. So that's my best guess about what's going on here.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point of view, because let me ask you, I've spoken to a lot of near-death experiencers,
yes,
probably over 100 at this point in the game. Also spiritual masters, yogis, and so on, from all walks of life. This concept that I'm about to ask you about is a concept that was introduced to me on the show, and it's fascinated me. And I've asked all sorts of my guests, from near-death experiencers to channels to the spiritual masters I've had on the show, is that we've heard of the concept of reincarnation, that we have past lives, we have future lives, we have this current life, and that we die and we keep evolving and we keep coming back, and the concept of karma and all this kind of stuff. But the concept that was thrown to me, and I find it so fascinating, is that there is no past life, there is no future life, that all the lives are happening at the same time, because there is no time on the quote unquote other side, this other realm that we're from, where this consciousness that you speak of lives, or is lives, like he has a house. But this concept of everything happening all at once, and that if I do something in this life, it quote unquote ripples back to my time as a Roman soldier, and it also ripples forward to my time as the president of a small country in 2550, all at the same time. When I say ripples, it's because rippling within my own soul's evolution.
Right.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this theory.
Yes. We can actually make it sort of mathematically precise using the language in our paper, Fusions of Consciousness. So, and we actually talk about this your very point at the very end of that paper. Okay. And what we point out is that we have this mathematical model of the dynamics of consciousness outside of space-time. Mm-hmm. And of course, the disclaimer, as always, is, of course, it's just a theory. It's not the truth. It's just a baby step. But it's an interesting baby step. In this mathematical model, there need be no arrow of time. So the arrow of time that we have is the arrow of entropy. Entropy increases with time, right? Entropy always increases with time. Second law of thermodynamics. In our dynamics of conscious, beyond space-time, the Markov dynamics can be what's called a homogeneous Markov chain. And the arrow, there is entropy, but it doesn't increase. So there's no entropic arrow of time. But it's a theorem. If you look at that dynamics that's timeless, from any projection, you project it anyway, so you're losing a little information. The projected dynamics will be a dynamics, but it will have an arrow of time as an artifact of the projection. This is a theorem. So in other words, what you were talking about informally, we can actually write it down as a theorem that you can prove in 3 or 4 lines and show that the arrow of time that we experience now is not an insight at all into the nature of the reality beyond our avatar. It's entirely an artifact, completely an artifact of the projection, not an insight at all into the truth beyond it. Now, from an evolutionary point of view, right? Here, evolution, organisms competing for limited resources, trying to mate, and so forth. These are limited resources. What's the most fundamental limited resource? Time. If I don't get food in time, I die. If I don't mate in time, I don't reproduce. If I don't get the next breath of air in time, I'm dead. If my heart doesn't beat in time, I'm dead. So time is the fundamental limited resource. Now, evolution by natural selection is an incredibly beautiful theory. I think I've published papers on it. I've worked on evolutionary game theory. It's incredible. Inside our space-time headset, there is no better theory about biological systems and biological evolution than the theory of evolution by natural selection. But space-time is just a headset. It's just a virtual reality. It's not the truth. And that includes the theory of evolution. Evolution is the best theory inside the headset. Nothing can beat it right now. But all of evolution by natural selection is an artifact of the projection from outside. None of it is a deep insight into the nature of reality. So there's this timeless, infinite intelligence, the consciousness, looking at itself from a projection. And when it sees itself from the projection, it looks like evolution by natural selection. It looks like all this competition, fighting for resources. It looks like an arrow of time. And all of that is not true of the deeper reality. All of it is mathematically in an artifact of the projection.
So if I may again quote Paramahansa Yogananda, he said so eloquently, since you were saying projection, he's like that we are all so focused on the screen and all of the violence and the action and the love and the drama of it all, like you were just saying. He goes, but the point is not to focus on the screen, is to look behind you and focus where the light is coming from, the projector.
That's right.
And so eloquently, in his yogic ways, such an eloquent explanation for a lot of what you were just saying. Would you agree?
I think that's an excellent metaphor to get the idea across, that you're not the video on the screen, you are the screen and the light that can show any possible video. My laptop that I'm looking at you on right now, I see a video on it, but the laptop itself could show countless different images, countless, not just the one I'm showing. And that's who you are. You are the infinite potential that could see anything.
I heard an explanation of this idea of everything happening all at once, which was so beautiful, and it was television. He goes, I think it was he or she said to me, well, if you're looking at a television screen right now, you turn on your TV and you're watching the football game. Well, even if you just stay in the realm of the football game, you know that there's 26 other games being played at the same time on Sunday. Right. But you can't see them, but they're happening. And also, but there's also episodes of Seinfeld reruns. There's also episodes of Friends. There's also episodes of All in the Family. There's The Sopranos. There's all these other shows going on and movies going on all at the same time. But your focus is on that game right now. But you have to understand that all this other stuff is happening at the exact same moment that you are watching this. So I was like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." Would you agree?
That's right. It makes sense if we're stuck with our little headset that has an arrow of time. When we transcend that, then they just all exist, right? That's right. The very notion of time and simultaneity then goes away, and which is really quite interesting. So you talked about reincarnation.
Yes, please.
So I've incarnated into this body, and consciousness is incarnated into your body, but also it incarnates into religious doctrines. Because if I'm willing to kill you for my Protestantism or your Catholicism or whatever, I've identified myself with that doctrine. So and then every time I get involved in something else and give it sort of identify with it, I've reincarnated into that. So we're incarnating ourselves all the time into stuff when we don't realize that we're the consciousness that transcends anything that we see, anything that we believe. We are reincarnating.
What's really interesting when you said that, something just popped into my head, is that throughout history, known history that we have records of, is that there is these dogmatic ideologies that have been throughout humanity, throughout time, where at a moment I would have killed you if you didn't believe in Ra. I would have killed you if you didn't believe in Zeus. I would have killed you if you didn't believe in but those kind of go away and we evolve to something else. Even the dogma, even the ideologies are evolving. So like Ra, not that I'm an expert on Ra, the sun god, or I forgot the other Egyptian, before Ra, there was the other Egyptian gods, Horus and so on. I'm not an expert in any of them, but it seems like with these newer meaning within the last 2,000 years, they seem to be attached to more spirituality, that there was an actual person that was preaching these ideas, whether it's Buddha, Jesus, even the Yogananda, so on and so forth, that create these ideas. It seems that even those things are evolving, and humanity is starting to let go of the things that doesn't serve them anymore. Maybe one of the reasons why we are going through this uprising of war now and of hate, and it's been going on for the last 10, 15 years, really. It's been going on for a long time, but it really seems to have been bubbling up over the last decade, more so than it was when I was growing up. It was just different when I was growing up. And it's like maybe hopefully the final realization of humanity to just go, that doesn't serve us anymore. We don't want to do this anymore. We need to evolve beyond this. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say that, well, there's a couple of parts to it. I would agree that our purpose is to wake up. And waking up involves realizing that the people I hate are in fact myself. And that, in Christianity, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's because your neighbor is yourself. And true love is recognizing that fact. You don't really love until you really understand that the person in front of you is you. Not like you, is you in a different avatar. When you really understand that is you, your neighbor is yourself, that's the foundation of real love. Now, whether it seems to be getting worse now, Steven Pinker at Harvard has data suggesting that there are bumps in the road, but humanity's homicide rate has been declining. It was far higher per capita back in Aboriginal times than it is now. And he's got clear data. So we are experiencing a terrible bump right now. I mean, but there's been a decline. I think that my own experience is that there are a lot of people who are waking up, but it's still a tiny, tiny fraction. But my hope is that right now, still the scientific paradigm is a physicalist one. And in the popular mind and in most scientists' mind, the space-time physicalist framework of reality is still what is dominating most people. When science, so no, spiritual traditions have been saying, no, that's not right, physicalism is false, but they've not had the beef, right? What technology can they make? Right? It's the scientists who gave us the laptops and the technology that you and I are using to know
in
spiritual
physical form. but in physical form.
In the physical,
In the
that's
physical
right.
form. Right.
So, but that's what's going to, really persuade people, right? The scientists can give us all this technology, right?
Of course.
Well, scientists are the ones who then realize space-time is doomed and actually start getting mathematical models of a reality beyond space-time that starts to smell like consciousness. I think that will really be the stepping stone for a lot more people to wake up. And when scientists then actually start going after that, with mathematical precision, I think the wake-up process will. So then they'll give more tools now to the spiritual traditions. They'll all of a sudden have these pointers that are much more clear. And also, I think that some of the pointers that spiritual traditions have are wrong, and we'll find them. We'll actually be able to find them and say that's just a bad pointer. That's a good pointer over here, and but we can actually evolve that pointer. So I see a back and forth between science and spirituality that will not in the next decade, maybe not in my lifetime, but I see it coming, where scientists realize space-time is doomed. There's a realm beyond space-time, and as we study that, we begin to realize, we're actually just discovering ourselves, and we're just avatars here in space-time.
Well, I would argue with you, though, that the spiritual space, the spiritual traditions, especially the Eastern traditions that are older, much, much older than the Western, that their technology that they gave us was more of inner technologies.
Sure.
The meditation, yoga, Tao Te Ching, these ideas, these philosophies are inner technologies, where science has given us amazing outer technologies, but
that's right.
They both can come. You can't do one without the other,
right.
in many ways. In many ways. So I wanted to clarify that, and I wanted to know if you would agree with me or not.
Oh, absolutely. The meditation in particular is an incredibly important technology. So I was just using the technology in terms of what would persuade people, right?
Sure.
I've got my iPad because of the scientists, and they're physicalists, so maybe physicalism is better than this religious stuff. Is sort of the idea I was pointing to. But I agree that meditation is an important technology. But when the scientists who are giving you iPads and iPhones are also saying our science seems to say that space-time isn't fundamental and maybe consciousness is, then people will go, well, shoot, if the scientists are saying so, well, maybe I better check into this. Maybe I should try meditation.
I see your point.
Then it'll wake us up.
Yeah, I see your point, because I completely see your point. I think it's going to be two different kind of wake-up calls. I think the person who is more physically inclined is going to wait for those cues. And the people who are more spiritually inclined are going to wake up from the more spiritual cues. I think you're right, though. I think both. I'm thinking it's one pill for both. I think it's going to be
I agree with you.
multiple different areas. And by the way, it's not even going to be two. I mean, a movie like The Matrix, I mean, that movie woke up. It brought simulation theory with Kung Fu, but brought simulation theory into the zeitgeist. And now Marvel is bringing the multiverse and parallel realities to billions of people around the world, where yes, those ideas have been around even in general culture, but not the way it is now. I mean, people are having deep conversations about the multiverse and parallel realities and the Mandela effect and these kind of ideas because of these pop culture or stories. I mean, look, if it wasn't for H.G. Wells, I don't know if we would have gotten to the moon,
Right.
He inspired so many scientists to go into science, because before H.G. Wells, there was not really a conversation about those kind of things. I might be wrong, but generally speaking, he's one of the more popular ones that really brought it out of people. Would you agree?
Well, I think that many people were, the young people were stimulated by these imaginative novels or movies that they saw. And I mean, I was stimulated. I was 13 years old when the first astronauts landed on the moon. Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and it completely inspired me. It made me want to be, a scientist and so forth. So novels, movies, real accomplishments by brave people going to the moon, risking their lives to go to the moon. Yeah, they wake up a generation and say, "Oh yeah, I want to do that too." Or even like when President Kennedy said, "We want to, by the end of this decade, send a man to the moon and bring him home safely.
Yes.
You know, absolutely. I mean, that's a clarion call to a generation, and makes you work real hard. With 1960s technology, boy, those guys were brave.
No. I've been to the Kennedy Space Center. I've been to the Houston Space Center. And when you look at the stuff, you're like, are you out of your mind?
Those guys they
were with pencils. They were doing the math with pencils and pens on paper. And they're just like, hold on, I got to get this algebra equation done. Okay. Yeah, I think we can get them back if we do this. Like, that is truly insane.
Yeah, they were incredibly brave and
or stupid, either one.
Well, then some of them died.
Yeah, exactly. No, many died, but the line of insanity and genius are very close together.
That's right, and brave, but someone had to be brave.
God bless them.
There had to be a John Glenn to do the first orbit around the Earth.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about the poor dog that was sent. Or the monkey originally.
The monkey, right? Right.
It's fascinating. Well, let me ask you this question. A lot of the things we're talking about have been discussed in, for example, the Vedic text or ancient text, thousands and thousands of years. These theories, these ideas. Where do you think they got this information? I mean, because we just figured it out a little while ago in the West, quote unquote. But these Eastern Vedic texts or older texts that are 6,000 to 7,000 years old, we're talking about simulation theory, the idea of Maya, the idea of the great illusion, the dream, even a little later, like Plato and Socrates, in the cave, obviously the allegory of the cave. These ideas, but specifically even older, that predates the West, with some of these Eastern traditions. Where do you think this information came from? Because they didn't have the materialistic basis that the West has now. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that they didn't have the technology. Like right now, I can talk about a virtual reality headset, and people will say, "Oh, yeah, I've worn one of those," and you sort of get it. It's, Plato had to use the cave and say, "Well, I've got a fire and I've got objects, and you're seeing the shadows of these objects against the cave wall." And people go, "Okay, I can see the shadow is not the real object; it's just a shadow of the object." And so maybe what I'm perceiving is just shadows of reality. And I think that many people, when they sit down and just, when sometimes you do have illusions, right? Visual illusions. Like if you stick a stick in water, look at the part above water and part in the water, it looks like the stick is broken. And as it bends, right? And you go, well, okay, that's not right. The stick isn't broken, and yet I'm seeing it broken. And when you do, so I guess a lot of people may have seen those kinds of things, and then or like if you're in Holland and you see a windmill turning from a distance. Sometimes when you're looking at it, it'll all of a sudden stop and turn the other direction. If you're far enough. And you go, whoa, what, how did that happen? And then you realize, no, that's just an illusion. So it doesn't take too sensitive a person to then go, well, wait a minute. If I was wrong about the stick in the water, and I'm wrong about that windmill, and you find some other things that you're wrong about.
You take a pencil, you take a stick, and it all becomes bendy when you start doing
it. It becomes bendy. That's right. And then you start doing things like you draw pictures like of a cube on a piece of paper, and it looks like it's 3D, but you know that it was just a picture on a piece of paper. So then you go, okay, wait a minute. I'm making up some of this stuff. Maybe I'm making up all of this stuff. Maybe, and that's so. I don't think it doesn't require too much genius to just go, whoa, I was wrong there, I was wrong there. Maybe I'm wrong everywhere. So that's my one guess about the Maya kind of thing.
Yeah, and the idea though that imagine, because you and I are talking about this in a very safe world, in the sense that we can have these conversations publicly, but can you imagine being a yogi 8,000 years ago and saying, this whole thing, not real? Can you imagine where that came from? My interpretation of it is that they were at a spiritual level that was so much deeper than what we understand, that they went inward.
Yes.
And a lot of this information, they might have tapped into what the truth was. If that's, and only someone who meditates understands that.
Well, and I agree with that. I think that that's also, in addition to I was talking about, just an average guy, but these yogis that are actually going very, very deep, that's where I think the fact that they are the one, and just like you and I are the one, that they are the infinite intelligence. So they didn't have the technology that we have, but they had something even better. They have the infinite intelligence that is you and me, and that is also my baby 4-year-old or whatever it might be. It is also infinite intelligence. It's just not yet expressed, right? So yeah, I agree with you.
Now, if we are in a simulation, Don, and this is all a giant, giant video game that we're all playing, do we eventually break out? Do we eventually escape? Do we eventually stop playing this game?
Yes, but there's infinitely many games to play. So yeah, we pop out of this one, but it's the one is so deep that there's literally an infinity of different perspectives to be taken. Literally infinity. In some sense, if the one consciousness is up to understanding itself, sort of self-realization, who am I? Then I think that for example, there's a theorem that no system can ever fully understand itself. So if I have like a computer system and I want that system to understand itself, well, I could have that computer system like build a software model of itself and of its interactions and so forth, of its parts. But now the system has changed because now it's got some software in it didn't have before. So now I need to model that new software addition to me. But as soon as I do that, I've got the fact that I have this new software addition so in other words, you can never catch up. You can never get a full model of yourself. And so maybe the one infinite consciousness is forever, quote unquote, taking different perspectives because in principle, there is no end to the exploration of itself. It can never know itself completely. And so once we step out of this headset, there's infinitely many more to step out. And one question for me then is, that I wonder about is, does it allow itself to be completely reincarnated into the new headset and completely lose itself and have to wake up, sometimes painfully, right? Kicking and screaming, so to speak, to its infinite nature and to realize, no, I'm not this projection. I'm not this avatar in this tiny little projection. My guess is yes.
It's interesting because even with what you just said, the spiritual explanation for it, from my point of view and my experience, is that when you become an ascended master, like a Yogananda, a Jesus, a Buddha, you choose to either come back or you choose to help others awaken through other ways. But there are ascended masters who would leave and they're like, I'm good now. I don't need to come back to earth. I've learned the lessons. Yeah, I could be 1,000 other things, but I've learned all the lessons I need to learn. Here, I now want to go to the next video game. I want to go to the next game that PlayStation's putting out. I've been in the Xbox. I want now PlayStation. And you evolve to a higher level because it doesn't make sense for you vibrationally to be down here anymore. Because if you've heard these stories of the yogis, even in the 1900s, when people got in front of the Maharishi, the energy that they felt, there was something that they was intoxicating. Some couldn't stand too close because it was just too much, and they would have to go back. He like radiated 30 or 50 feet out or something like that.
Wow.
It's fascinating. And I want to ask you one last question, because I could talk to you for another hour or two, Don, without question. But let me ask you another question in regards to the concept of frequency. In the spiritual traditions, they talk about that the higher the frequency, the closer you are to source. So hate, anger, prejudice, these are all very low frequency, very, very slow. But love, service, kindness, these are higher frequencies in nature, according to spirituality. But we have proven that there is frequency, and that we all, in many ways, the whole planet sings at different frequencies at all time, hums almost at a different frequency at all times. And especially, like I was just saying with the Maharishi, they were at a higher frequency that they couldn't even attract, a mugger. That's like you don't see yogis getting mugged, or that's just not a thing you hear. You also never heard of the yogic crusades where they were killing people for in the name of the source. Like,
right.
So what's your perspective on frequency and spiritual frequency, and also just mathematical physics frequencies? And is there a way that those two connect?
Yes. And it ties in with what you were saying about some yogic masters saying, well, I don't need to stay at this level. I'll go to a higher level. Don't have to come back here. So on that, I think the space-time is a fairly cheap headset. It's only 4 dimensions.
Right.
3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. Why not 50 dimensions? Why not 5 billion? Why not 1 trillion dimensions? Why not having 30,000 different dimensions of color instead of just 3 dimensions of color, and so forth? So, the hue space, for example. There's saturation and brightness and all those. But so in other words, we have a certain number of dimensions of color. Why not have 1 trillion other dimensions of color that why not? So I think we have one of the cheaper headsets that the one can use to look at itself, and it falls apart at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. So we're in one of the low frequency models, right? But yes, in the mathematics that we're working on, this Markovian dynamics of conscious agents, so that we talk about in that Fusions of Consciousness paper, and I talk about in my book, The Case Against Reality. So I talk about this in the very last chapter of my book, The Case Against Reality. It's a Markovian dynamics, and it's all about frequencies. But this is a mathematically precise theory about where these frequencies come from. And it turns out, as you get more and more integrated systems, then the frequencies go up. So you get these larger and larger communication classes. The Markov communicating class gets more and more coherent, and as a result, what we call the momentum gets larger, and therefore the spatial frequency gets smaller. So the frequencies get finer. You get higher and higher frequencies in this thing. So yes, we actually have a mathematical model that I wasn't trying to model this kind of yogic idea of higher frequencies and so forth. It just came out of our mathematics. As you got more and more coherent, larger interactions of conscious agents, the frequencies that correspond to it get higher. So yes, it's really, it falls right out of the theory. But again, I'm not putting our theory out as the truth. It's a first baby step outside of space-time towards understanding consciousness, just the first baby step.
And that's what this show is all about. It's just trying to figure everything out as much as we possibly can, and going through different avenues to talk. That's why I talk to so many different kinds of people from so many different walks of life, because in this conversation, you've opened up my eyes to a bunch of different things I hadn't thought about before.
Oh, great.
And hopefully I've thrown a couple at you
Yes.
that you've thought about differently as well, because there's not a lot of quantum physicists talking to near-death experiencers. Right. But there's some value there, and vice versa. So hopefully we could all, I'm trying to bridge the gap, Don. I'm doing the best I can to bridge the gap. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests. What is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
I would say now that learning to let go of thought, being able to be in this moment without being lost in my thoughts and just being present, that is what we're here for. That's what our purpose is to wake up. So you wake up when you can actually be washing the dishes and be present, and not being grudging that you're washing the dishes, not being upset that you're washing the dishes, but literally in the moment, being present. And so that's a fulfilled and fulfilling life, if this moment, which is the only moment I can actually choose to do anything, I choose to not be lost in thought, but to actually be aware of my emotions, to be aware of the thoughts that are going on, not identified with the thoughts, but being just aware of the thoughts, looking at them without reincarnating into them. And then that is living that way. And I'm not saying I do that all the time. I do it occasionally. Mm-hmm. But I think that if you ask what is a fulfilled life, I think that is a fulfilled life. It's not getting rich, because everything that you get, you're going to take the headset off. It's everything that you accumulate, you're going to lose. Guaranteed. Fame, riches, cars, houses, followers, you're going to lose every bit of it. And you'll lose it within a few decades, probably sooner. So none of that, it'll make you happy for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden you're on to the next thing. That wasn't it. What is it? When you become a billionaire and that's not it, what is it that you need? Being present in this moment without thought, and just then realizing who you are. You are the infinite intelligence. You're not the avatar. That's a fulfilled life.
If you could go back in time and talk to little Don, what advice would you give him?
Learn to have internal silence. It's fine to go and pursue fun things, get an education, get a good job, as long as you realize you're going to walk away from all of it. So none of that is you. Don't identify with anything. It will always. So learn to go into complete inner silence and find out who you really are. The big question is, who am I? If you know who you really are, and it's not my bank account, it's not my car, it's not my house, it's not my popularity, it's nothing. None of that is me. None of that is me. My body isn't me. Mm-hmm. So I would say, find out the answer to this question. Who am I? That's what I would tell myself.
How do you define source or God?
Again, only by ostensive definition. So we go right back to the very start of our conversation, where I would have to say, if I try to just use words and give definitions, mm-hmm. it won't work. But if I give you pointing instructions, like giving you a glass of wine and saying, you've never had wine, here, have a glass, take a sip, that's wine. All I can say about source is, if you want to know what source is, sit in silence, turn out the light, no distractions, let go of thoughts. And when you're aware of the silence and nothing else, you had your first little taste of source, but just the first little taste. Now go into it further, spend more time there, more time there. When you can start to spend hours there, then you're starting to really know a little bit more about the source, and yet you've only scratched the surface of the depths of who you are.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
Of our life here, I think, is to wake up. I mean, we're here to get lost, to not know who we are, to think that I need to compete with you to be, smarter than you, or more richer than you, or more popular than you, or faster than you, whatever it might be. And you see this even 3 or 4 year olds, right? They're already there. That's mine, and mine's better than yours, and so we're here to get lost, to identify with the avatar, and then to wake up, and to walk away from that all, and to realize we're going to take this headset off, and nothing was lost.
And where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing in the world?
I have a book called The Case Against Reality. The subtitle is Why Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes. So it's more within the space-time headset kind of framework where I'm talking about that. But then at the last chapter, I say, but now that we've done all this stuff in evolution, now it's time to let go of space-time altogether. That includes letting go of evolution. So the book sort of goes through that. So I would say that, and I've got a Twitter account, so at Donald D. Hoffman.
Fair enough. And do you have any parting messages for the audience, Don?
Yeah, I would just say this, that there's been this tension between science and spirituality, and it's not going to be necessary. That science is realizing that space-time isn't fundamental, and is bringing new tools to the table. The spiritual traditions have already said that. They've said that space-time isn't fundamental. There's a spiritual realm outside of space-time that's more fundamental, but they haven't had as good pointers. So when science and spirituality meet, science can provide new pointers, and spirituality can provide thousands of years of meditation and the insights. And together, I think humanity can move forward with a scientific spirituality that is going to not only help us personally, but the technologies will be outside of space-time and will be indistinguishable from magic.
Don, I appreciate you and everything you're doing in the world, my friend. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it for the kind invitation.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.